Welcome to the deep dive. You know, there's just so much information flying around, especially if you're a software engineer. It can really feel overwhelming trying to keep up, right? Like drinking from a fire hose sometimes.
Absolutely. It's tough to know what's actually worth your time.
So today, we're trying to cut through some of that noise. We're doing a deep dive specifically for you, hoping to give you a bit of a shortcut to some real clarity and insight.
Exactly. And our source today is a really interesting piece from the Amigos Code newsletter. It was published back on April 9th, 2025 by Mama Samba Brema Nelson Jallo.
And the title kind of says it all. 9 books every software engineer should read. Seriously.
Yep, pretty direct.
What I like is that the source makes it clear this isn't just, a list of dry textbooks. It frames them more as hard-won lessons, light bulb moments.
Yeah, and the kind of advice you'd get from that one developer who's been around the block, that really captures it, I think.
It does. And there's this core idea in the piece that the right book, when you read it at the right time, can genuinely change things. Not just how you code, but how you think, how you communicate.
How you solve problems. It's about becoming a more effective engineer overall.
Precisely. So, should we dive in? Unpack these 9 essentials.
Let's do it. First up, a title that probably sounds familiar to a lot of folks. 1, Clean Code by Robert C. Martin or, Uncle Bob.
Ah, Uncle Bob. The newsletter calls this one the developer's rite of passage, almost like coding therapy for messy habits.
Huh, coding therapy. I like that. And it's true, isn't it? The book really hammers home that, well, messy code is expensive.
Super expensive. And honestly, maybe more of us write it than we'd like to admit sometimes. It's not just about the time spent fixing things later, right? It's the mental load, the bugs.
Team morale, even.
Yeah,
It all adds up. Now, the source does point out it uses a lot of Java examples.
Right, I saw that. But it stresses the lessons are totally universal.
Exactly. The principles apply no matter what language you're using. And it also gives a little warning. Prepare for some self-reflection.
It mentions maybe even crying at your old code. What's that about, really? That moment of recognition.
I think it is. It's that oof moment when you look back and think, wow, I really did that. But now you know better. It's actually a sign of growth, right?
Yeah, a painful sign maybe, but growth nonetheless. Okay, so from cleaning up individual lines of code, where do we go next?
We zoom out a bit. Book number 2 is The Pragmatic Programmer by David Thomas and Andrew Hunt. This one's framed less as a how-to and more like a wise mentor.
A mentor? How so?
Well, it's not just about the technical stuff. The source says it focuses on making you a better thinker, communicator, and problem solver. It's called a true career companion.
Okay, so less code, more philosophy. The newsletter mentions it's more like a conversation than a tutorial, so don't expect loads of code snippets.
Exactly. It's about the mindset. Things like taking ownership, learning continuously, avoiding software rot by fixing those small problems before they grow. It's about the craft, really.
That idea of fixing broken windows in code, I like that. So crucial stuff for long-term success, not just short-term fixes.
Definitely. Foundational thinking.
All right, from the individual mindset, let's scale up. Big time. 3, software engineering at Google. How do they manage thousands of engineers on one code base? That sounds chaotic.
Right. This book apparently gives you the inside look. It's about scaling code and humans, which is maybe the harder part.
Scaling humans, yeah. What are the key takeaways mentioned?
Things like the importance of code readability. Readability beats cleverness is a direct quote, I think. And how they make tech decisions that are meant to last for years, not just months. It also touches on their tooling, like their build systems and testing culture.
Sounds intense. The source does clarify it's not a beginner's book.
Makes sense. It's called a masterclass in keeping large systems sane. So probably aimed at folks dealing with or wanting to understand that kind of scale.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Design patterns can be, well, a bit dry sometimes.
They can, yeah. Which brings us nicely to 4. Head-first design patterns. This one sounds completely different.
How so? The description is pretty fun. Weird, funny, visual, even like Schoolhouse Rock for developers.
Schoolhouse Rock. I love that. It apparently uses simple language, tons of real-world examples, and even cartoons that somehow make sense.
The key is making those abstract patterns feel concrete, I guess.
Seems like it. The visual narrative style helps you really get the why behind a pattern, not just memorize its structure. Makes it stick.
The newsletter does add a little note. The style is quirky, not corporate. So maybe not for everyone if you prefer a more traditional textbook feel.
Yeah, fair point. It's definitely got a distinct style.
Okay, foundational skills. Can't build much without understanding data. That leads to 5. Learning SQL by Alan Bewley.
Ugh, sequel. Still so fundamental. This book apparently takes you from just basic select statements up to being a real SQL Jedi.
A SQL Jedi. How does it do that? Just syntax.
No, it sounds like it goes deeper. It explains things in plain English, focusing not just on how to write queries, but why they work the way they do. Optimization, indexing, that kind of stuff.
So you actually understand the database engine a bit better.
Exactly, making you a smarter SQL user.
Yeah.
But the source does note its focus is squarely on relational databases.
Right. So if you're deep in the NoSQL world, this is great for the relational side, but maybe not your whole picture.
Precisely. Okay, ready to circle back to Uncle Bob.
There's another one.
Yep. 6, Clean Architecture, also by Robert C. Martin. And it's important, the source says, to see how this is different from clean code.
Okay, how's it different? Clean code is lines of code. So
Yeah.
clean architecture is...
About building good systems. The bigger picture. The structure.
System design. So this gets into things like why decoupling matters and what separation of concerns really looks like in practice.
Exactly. How to structure projects so they don't turn into spaghetti code nightmares later on.
Yeah.
How to make them maintainable, testable, resilient.
Can you give us a quick analogy for that? Decoupling.
Oh, the source didn't give one, but think Legos. Right. Good architecture is like having well-defined Lego bricks. You can swap one out, add a new one, without breaking the whole thing. Bad architecture is like everything's glued together. One change breaks everything.
Nice. The Lego analogy works. So clean architecture gives you the blueprint for building with good bricks. The source calls it abstract sometimes, more blueprint than tutorial.
Yeah, it's about the principles. Very powerful stuff for bigger projects.
Okay, speaking of bigger systems, let's talk distributed systems. Buzzwords like microservices, Kubernetes, containers, they're everywhere.
And book 7, Designing Distributed Systems by Brendan Burns, aims to make them less like buzzwords and more like practical tools.
Brendan Burns, isn't he one of the Kubernetes co-creator?
He is, which definitely gives the book some cred.
Yeah.
It's positioned as a quick start guide for people building for scale.
So practical patterns you can actually use.
That's the idea. It gives you a starter pack, as the source puts it. Not necessarily a super deep dive, maybe not a PhD thesis, but the core patterns for dealing with things like, consistency, failure, discovery in distributed setups.
Got it. A practical entry point into that complex world. Okay, moving from the tech itself to how we build and deploy it. DevOps.
Right. 8, DevOps Handbook. This isn't just about the tools, the CI/CD pipelines and all that.
What's the focus then?
The source highlights culture, collaboration, and continuous improvement. It's about the whole workflow.
That cultural aspect is huge, isn't it? You can have all the fancy tools, but if the teams don't work together well.
Exactly. The handbook apparently uses real case studies to show how improving flow and feedback loops leads to shipping better software faster. It gives a clear roadmap.
Sounds valuable. The newsletter does mention some sections are dense.
Yeah, it calls it a book you'll read with a highlighter in hand. So maybe something to study rather than skim.
Makes sense. Okay, we're at number 9, the final book.
And it's a big one. 9, Code Complete by Steve McConnell. This one is often called the Encyclopedia of Software Construction.
Whoa, encyclopedia.
Right.
How does it compare to, say, clean code?
The source draws that comparison directly. If clean code is the starter kit for good code habits,
Then Code Complete is.
the full toolkit, it's described as much more comprehensive.
What kind of things does it cover?
All sorts. The newsletter lists.
Yeah.
Naming things, yes, again.
Yeah.
Code organization. Defensive programming. Basically the whole craft of building software that, quote, just works. It's about discipline, structure, really building robust stuff from the ground up.
Sounds incredibly thorough, but also maybe long.
Oh, yeah. The source says it's huge, thick, but also worth every page. It's a commitment, but the payoff is potentially massive in terms of how you build software.
Okay, that's quite a list. 9 heavy hitters.
Definitely a solid reading list.
So wrapping this up, the key message from the Amiga's Code piece seems to be, look, reading one book won't magically make you a senior engineer overnight.
Right. But that core idea holds. The right book at the right point in your journey really can spark something big.
So the advice is pretty straightforward. Pick one, read slowly, take notes. And I like this bit. Let it mess with your brain a little.
Yeah. When it starts challenging how you think, that's when you know you're onto something good, the source suggests.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with, building on that. Think about how these principles, clean code, solid architecture, pragmatic thinking, good collaboration, how they might apply beyond just your code editor.
Interesting. Like, how can understanding system design help you understand, I don't know, organizational structures?
Hmm.
Or how can clean communication principles improve team dynamics?
Exactly. Could these ideas help you debug not just code, but how you approach any complex problem? Whether it's technical, organizational, whatever, it's not just about building software.
It's about building better ways to think and solve.
Something to chew on. Thanks for diving in today.
My pleasure. Lots to think about there.